My name is Gordon Norberg, and I'm a past member of, for your interest, past member of the Tuktut Nogait National Park Management Board. So I got to make that clear. I'm not on the board anymore, but I have done some bit of work with the park after I left on the management plan until COVID hit. So nothing's been done since the virus hit. So, but glad to talk to you about what my life was with the park during my time with the park. I was 15 years on the board, so it wasn't so much of an interest. I was asked by or nominated by our former MP for the NWT, Ethel Blond and Andrew, put my name forward to the GNWT because I was designated the GNWT rep, and I didn't know a thing about it, but I said sure, I'll see what it's about. So I was a greenhorn, and it turned out to be 15 years of learning for me. You know, the park is fairly new. It's up by Polituk. The park was established primarily to protect the calving grounds of the blue-nosed West caribou herd. As you're aware, all caribou herds across the north, west of the Mackenzie Mountains, have all been decimated in numbers. They're way down. The porcupine, which is east of the Mackenzie Mountains, is the only healthy herd that we're aware of right now. So it became even more important that the park was established. So, but that was the main reason. There was other reasons for the establishment of the park: create employment for Polituk residents or Inuvialuit residents, and create some economic opportunities through tourism, through science, if that was like studies. But the main reason that we've really stuck to, because it's so far away from us, from everybody, and the cost to get into that park is astronomical, that visitation hasn't been a big factor in the time I was there. So studies that the park did became our primary, not so much a concern, but what we dealt with as a board. Yeah. Archaeology was a big topic. If you fly over that park, it looks like just desolate country. It doesn't look like there's anything there, but there's two major river systems in that park. Once you're on the ground, it's a totally different story. The countryside, the vista is just phenomenal. You have canyons that tower. You have hoodoos on the Brock River system that tower 200-300 feet. Cliffs that are 200-300 feet. Laurentier Falls on the Hornaday River, and so it's a totally different picture once you're on the ground, and it's phenomenal scenery going through that country. So archaeology. Having said that, it looks like there's all rock, right? It looks like it's just a barren land of rock. The park has, through the years, have identified over 500 archaeological sites in that park, including grave sites, including drive lanes for caribou, kayak stands, campsites. So it's been in use for a long, long time. And Parks Canada has, as an example, have carbon dated some pottery shards that go back as far as 900 years. And we know that it's been used at least for the last 500 years and longer. There's also, you always give a little wiggle room for your carbon dating, but it's pottery shards. These were actual pottery shards from 900 years ago that were made by somebody back then. Now you got to think, wow, because they're fairly thick fired pots that were made out of clay, right? Used for cooking. So who did this? Who were the people in there? So we've seen the grave sites, we've seen the remains, because they're buried on the ground and covered with rock. So that's the archaeology side, right? So on the caribou management side, the big concern has been, why are the numbers dropping so much? Why have they dropped from about 100,000 animals for that particular herd to about 20,000 today, 20 to 22,000. It seems to have stabilized at that level. And the Blue Nose West herd is used by a number of communities, obviously, down into the Sawtooth and in the Polituk region. It's their primary meat source. So it's very, very important that what's left of the big herd stays healthy. Now, why did the numbers drop? We talk about science. Parks Canada has a good number of scientists that work for them, including people in Inuvik out of the Western Arctic Field Unit. And we've been privileged to work with them. And part of it goes something like this, is that over time, I asked the question, why do they keep coming back to the same spot every year? Why this particular, right in the interior of the park is the calving grounds. Why do they keep coming back here? Year after year after year for millennia. It hasn't changed, right? They all come back to the same area, drop their calves, and get them to be able to move, and then they move out back wherever they want to go. They go southwest, out of the park. And so that's been a kind of the central question, and the parks people have been looking at it using satellite data from way back, and using drones now to do aerial surveys of the ground, and what's called ground truthing. Afterwards is ground truthing. You take pictures from the air, from way up first, so you get a great big picture. You go with drones to get a smaller picture of what you found from the satellites, and then you put people on the ground to ground truth and see. So you're looking at vegetation, you're looking at what's growing there, what do the caribou eat, what don't they eat, what don't they like, and so those questions we've been asked, and they've been looking at it now for a number of years, and we're starting to get a picture of what they like to eat and why they move out, probably why they would move out, and how plants react to being eaten. I mean, all those kind of things that are kind of are really neat. So that's been the big focus over I wouldn't say the past 15 years, but especially over the last 10 years. And with our involvement, with the community involvement of the hunters and trappers, things like no helicopter flights during calving and post-calving was instituted, no direct flights over the calving grounds of any kind for airplanes, so as not to disturb them. So other work done by parks included raptor surveys, bird surveys. We monitor the river for water quality, what they call benthic studies. Quality of, or not so much a quality, but lemming surveys to kind of as a judge of the ecosystem. This is all the work being done by the park scientists and people that work for parks. They monitor the river. They take water samples once a year. There were water gauge on the Hornaday River. We have a weather station right in the calving ground that's monitored 24/7. And what you need to get is a long-term picture of what's going on in the environment. 1 or 2 years doesn't give you anything. So you need to see if there's any changes that are happening in the water, on the ground, with the weather. So they're finally starting to get some longevity of record that's been developed, because the park was established in the late 90s, right? So it's relatively young.
And what's it been like for you working with the researchers and scientists who are talking to the board?
It's been absolutely wonderful. I think I've learned more from them than I've been able to. What we pass on as board members and the board is made up of community members as well, right? I'm from the north, from the Arctic, and have family connections in Pawlatuck. So we provide a layman's, or in a sense, traditional knowledge of the area, of the climate and what we see changing. The anecdotal side of science, I guess, because there is more going on. You can't isolate the park from what else is going on in everywhere else. So there's been a lot of work done on the geology of the area through Geological Survey of Canada, and that in itself is really interesting. Did you know that the rocks that they find in Quebec and Ontario are the same age as what they find in Good Hope as in the park? All the same age, all the same kind of rock.
So they can kind of tell like that it was connected to this whole...
Yeah, it was all connected at one time. Yeah. And there was a giant river that way before our time, like a few million years ago, that come up through this whole part of the world and went out up north, right? So, and all kinds of neat stuff. You learn all kinds of neat terms that you never knew existed. And when the glaciers receded from the area from the last ice age, they left these mini mountains of deposit and gravel, right? They look like, you know what a pingo is, the shape of a pingo.
Yeah.
But an interesting point is talking about glaciation is that the interior of the park was unglaciated. So it was high enough that it was never covered by ice. Yeah. And the calving grounds are up high, so you get better winds, less insect activity. Predators can be seen easier. So all of those questions.
But why do you think it's really important for these researchers and scientists to include the community and the traditional knowledge?
Well, first of
into
all,
their work?
it's their park, essentially. I mean, it's a national park, but it was their initiative that established the national park.
The communities?
The community. They had looked at a whole number of options, if you want to call it, to protect the caribou herd or the calving grounds, because the numbers were already in flux, but they knew, the community knew, that's where they calved, and they wanted to protect it from development. At that time, there was a big mining, not a big mining outfit, but it was a mining outfit looking at what's called a magnetic anomaly right in their region, and part of it was showing up into the park, today's park boundary, and right off of it indicates something big down underground somewhere down, and that I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but something different for mineralization is happening or happened way below ground in there. It could be valuable, right? Who knows? You can't find out until you drill way down. So there was a lot of activity starting to happen because of that, and they wanted a way to protect the caribou, which is their primary traditional meat source, along with fish. In general, they wanted some system to protect the area, and they chose national park. In choosing the national park and getting it established, they also said it was in Inuvialuit lands already, because the IFA, the Inuvialuit Final Agreement, had already been signed. So it's inside of that settlement region, which gives the Inuvialuit certain rights, even within the park. We can hunt in there. I'm an Inuk, I'm Inuvialuit. So if I lived there, I could go hunting in the park without anybody's permission, without having to get a park permit, any of that stuff. So long as it's for subsistence, right? You can go fishing in there. As an Inuk, you can hunt anything you want in that park. The hunters and trappers have voluntarily said no hunting grizzlies in there. Leave them alone, and no commercial hunts in there, any of that kind of stuff. And it's very tough terrain to travel in, so not many people will go into hunting there anyway. But other than the people that come in a long time ago from the coast, so the people I'm talking about with the archaeological work that we found. Yep. And there was a good reason for them to come in. There's caribou lanes where they cross a river. In one site we've identified, or archaeologists have identified, over 25 caches where they would cache meat, and camps and camperings and kayak stands. And it's been used for millennia by the caribou because it's advantageous to them, I guess, because the river narrows and they can cross it and come when they head from the calving grounds, coming, that would be south and west as they move through. Yeah. We've stood way up on the ground, up above the hill there, on the hills, and watched them cross, thousands of them. And they're very curious. The young ones are very curious, right? They'll come up behind you and keep walking straight at you, and they keep looking at you, and you know, they're within 50 feet of you, and so who are you? You don't look like a caribou, you know. And so it's very interesting work. Oh, there's so many different fields that we get to work with, or we get input from the scientists.
Right.
A lot of it is directed by us or by questions from us.
That's really cool.
But they report every year to the board, first on what their plans are, and then the following year on the results of what we've seen in the past year. So, and to not just us being the board, but to the community as a whole.
Yeah.
And our meetings were all public, and purposefully we met with the hunters and trappers and with the Politic Community Corp once a year as a public meeting, and got any of their concerns. We did our reporting to them, or we had the science group report to them on how things went, and good direction from them as to what we can and can't do. And to me, it was two big areas, three, I guess you could say. Why do the caribou keep coming back to the same place? That whole story that goes around with calving and post-calving. The second area of interest to me was, and these developed over 15 years. I knew nothing about this stuff at the beginning, right? The second one was the archaeological work. I was very curious to know what group of people were in here. Because when you look at you can look under the rocks where they're buried. And in one of the cases, you could see the skeleton. And they're buried with all their implements and stuff. But what I noticed and got really intrigued about was the size of the skulls. They're very small, right? So these weren't big people. And that'll tie into something else in a sec. So holy cow, these weren't big human beings. They were smaller stature human beings. Then we had a camp excavated, and the bed, their sleeping platform, was a little bit bigger than that coffee table, right? How long is that? 4 feet?
4 feet, yeah.
So if I were to lay on it, I'd be in a fetal position, right? So, okay, who are these people? Then the stories that go back, and they tie in with Delaunay as well, because Delaunay is part of this whole process too. And the southern part of it goes into their traditional territory, and the extension into the Sawtoo. There's a lot of stories of little people and their interaction with Delaunay.
So there's like traditional stories of little people?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
Doesn't involve just the park. The stories of these little people are all across the north, right? I don't know if you've heard any, but we've heard lots of them. And my brother-in-law in Tuktut has seen them, right? But they're loath to be neared by us. They don't want us going near them, so they disappear in a hurry. And so, but that's a whole other side of this. So the third part of this was the historical story of Pawtucket and its people, and how it established, and so we've been involved, and so has Parks, in getting the story from elders, getting them recorded and translated and written down in book form, and so you get their story, because our elders are disappearing so fast that the story disappears with them if you don't have it recorded or written. And that traditional knowledge, in its depth, is the depth is narrowing. Is us. I'm 72, and I don't have the traditional knowledge that those that have passed would have had, that have lived that life. I don't have the knowledge that my father had, right? Of hunting and living and trapping and all about life in the Arctic. I learned lots from him, but I went away to school when I was 13. I left home when I was 13. So from then on, it was work life that we know today.
Yeah.
Prior to that, for the first 13 years, yeah, he took us on trap lines and fishing and hunting, and so I learned quite a bit that I still retain today. But a lot of our elders are disappearing, and so is that knowledge. We now have what I call younger elders, people my age, my generation. Very few that are much older than us are left out there to tell the story and to guide the younger people in life as they knew it, and the values that were important back then. It's hard work to trap. It's hard work to hunt. The hunting part is easy. It's after the hunt where the work begins, and that's what I try and tell my sons here. Yeah, the hunt is fun. It's easy till you drop the animal, and then you work like a dog. And trapping is all work.
Yeah.
Right? It's hard work. It's easier to go get a hamburger at the Northern Store wrapped up with 600 years of preservative in it and put it in the microwave. But to the credit of the people in Pollock and across the north, caribou meat is a staple and just about a must-have. I miss it. I can't get it here. Right? And with the numbers way down, I can't get my family on the coast to hunt for me so I can get some caribou meat. They need whatever they can get in their homes. So it's critically important we try and find out. I mean, there's so many factors that could be affecting what's going on in general, never mind up north here.
Yeah.
Climate change, you see it this year. Look at the summer we've had here. Yeah. So weather is another science that we've been watching. Big time, you know. So the whole issue of climate change has been another one that we've been monitoring in a system that is influenced by other forces. So nothing inside the park goes on that we don't know about. 99.99% of the time. Yeah. Very little goes on in the park that we don't know about, or especially the people in Pollock. They try and be aware of what's happening. So all of the scientists that you can think of are involved in one way or another, or become involved within the park system. From the climate, to water, to the land, to vegetation, to understanding animal behavior, to looking at predators and all this other good stuff. And you need people who are dedicated to over the long term. And we're one of the studies that the management groups of across all of the caribou herds is want to know is how much predation is there by grizzlies, by others, by wolves, or raptors, or all this. We don't know
Yeah.
how heavy predation is on, especially during calving season. And as a matter of interest, they've studied the porcupine caribou herd quite extensively. That's the one in the Yukon, Alaska North Slope. And I'll give you one guess as to who do you think predates on calves most? We all think that it might be grizzlies or wolves or foxes or stuff. Bald eagles. Eagles take the most newborn calves out of all of the predators. So I found that quite interesting. So things that but studying why caribou and we always go back to caribou. Everything else comes into play though, right? Weather, vegetation, water quality, all of this other sciences always comes back to, in this particular park, back to protecting the caribou and the caribou herds, especially in their most vulnerable time, which is calving time and post-calving. Once post-calving is done, we were allowed to go back in with airplanes and helicopters to do our work. And usually at the end of July is when they've moved out and we could go in. Yeah. If you're interested in learning about the park or the park system in general, you can go onto their website, right? I think all the parks across Canada are on there, and you can. I'm not up to date on exactly what's on the internet right now, because it's been a work in progress to get. There's 3 national parks up in the territory, right? One over in the Yukon called Inuvik, up on Banks Islands called Ologies, and Tuktut Nogait, all managed out of Inuvik. Plus the Pingo, the Pingos in Tuk is part of that. There's the Delaney, Sayo piece on this as well. So probably the best source is to go to the website and to learn about the different parks. You can pick any park across the country you want, but those ones up north have been kind of a work in progress to get them into the national system. In terms of books, there's lots of books that are out. Well, I shouldn't say lots, but the stuff we're talking about, but a lot of stories that go way back on the early days of airplanes, the early days of shipping, the early explorers primarily from Herschel going east, from Herschel Island in the whaling days. There are books like that. Stephenson's time, if you want to read about Stephenson, there are books written about him. And other explorers that have come through. In terms of time span, it's relatively short. When you start to think about 800,000-900,000 years ago, or 10,000 years ago, when Inuit first moved across the Arctic over to Greenland, and the contact with Europeans and the arrival of metal and the trade and all this kind of good stuff, you're going back 10,000 years. So there's no specific book I would recommend, but there are books out there that people can access to learn areas of interest. And my grandfather was one of the early explorers, one of the first through the Northwest Passage. I think it's important that kids, students, people in school study sciences, not just general subjects, right? There's a lot of important work to be done. There is work being done, but there's more work to be done. And you look at what's happening right now. I mean, um, we need people to study this stuff. You know, I'm not going back to school. I'm 72. I mean, I learn new things all the time, but for young people to get into the sciences and would be encouraging. You know, it's a lot of fun actually when you get into it. It's actually, how do you do some of this stuff, and yeah, sure, it's hard work to get to that point, but what isn't hard. You're not going to get anywhere unless you put the effort in, and it's worthwhile. Yeah. And this is where traditional knowledge is starting to lessen. I mean, you can see climate change as a whole world on its own, right? And the effects it's having for hunters and trappers in the north. You can't rely on the weather anymore. You can't rely on sea ice, where you could in the past, and say, well, it's good now, we can go bear hunting, get out on the sea ice. You get out on the sea ice and all of a sudden it's gone. And that's happened to hunters who've had to be rescued because the ice broke off. One of the most interesting things talking about traditional knowledge and people that are passing, probably a little known fact, is that Europeans, let's call them that, people that come that settled in this country after the indigenous people, right, is that they see the world in two dimensions. We including me, see the world in two dimensions, right? Inuits see it in three dimensions. So our indigenous people see it in three dimensions. So they understand. The old people, you wouldn't get them lost in a blizzard where you couldn't see anything, because they look at everything around them and understand what time of year, which way the winds blow, which way the snow is drifting, which way it's piling up on in front of you, as to where you're going and where you've been in a whiteout. I'd be lost, right? So that whole business of traditional knowledge is so important, and to tie it into what you were just saying is that we've seen these cycles before in terms of warming, cooling, the change in climate. You're hearing lots about it right now as they do ice core studies and go way back to when the dinosaurs used to roam around here. But what's happening right now is happening faster and faster and faster. So the effects of climate change are noticed more and more. Animals aren't as quick to adapt to the changing times. Why aren't we getting too many fish right now in the Arctic? Why aren't we getting char? You talk to people in Ologies. Where'd the char go? Fishing was poor this year. It was poor last year. How come? How come the salmon are showing up in the Arctic? Right? Why are they catching more salmon? Are they chasing the char out? We don't know, right? So, but changes are happening. How come these bugs are showing up on the Arctic coast that aren't supposed to be there? And birds and all this, you know. Why are the beaver up in around Tuktut, where there's never seen them before? Why are the moose swimming in the Arctic Ocean? You know, people took pictures of them in Politic swimming in the Arctic Ocean and then walked back out after they cooled off and headed back south again. Right? So what's happening to this world of ours, right? You look at the ice cover and you see lots of stories about the lack of ice cover in the Arctic and stuff. So there's a world of science out there that needs to be looked at and mitigated, or mankind has to mitigate it. Or, we have to do our part. All of this comes into the picture, and it's just as important for the Inuit of the Arctic to do their part as it is for non-Inuit elsewhere to do their part. So, but it's not just in Tuktut Nogait that they need this work. Up in Ologies and in the islands, right? It's on Banks Island. Over in Ivavik, which is on the Yukon side, or on the Firth River. All of this kind of science work is going on in our particular world up there, and you have wood buffalo right here, you have Nahanni, right? So there's a lot of opportunities for young people to try and access, for not just employment, but if you like the outdoors and you like science, come get it.
That's